Welcome, everybody, to Millennials Are Killing Capitalism Live. It is good to be with you all on this, in these ridiculous times that we're living in. Obviously, I hope everybody is doing as well as can be expected. Obviously, the war is now in its seventh day, the US war in Iran. Iran, last night, our time, seemed to be just lighting up US and Israeli targets across their region, which I think speaks well for their that and the fact that prices of gas are going up and everything else. I think speaks well that they are well prepared for this imperialist war. But nonetheless, at the same time, we're seeing just the sheer brutality of U.S. imperialism, the cowardice, the carpet bombing. Um, it's just disgusting. And yeah, I don't know. I'm obviously full of rage, with some hope, but also the weight of the violence of U.S. imperialism and their Zionist best friend. Um, is heavy. Is heavy. So the guest today, first of all, I just want to say all of you have to like, share, subscribe this video because our guests today would normally be the one who would absolutely make sure to do that every time. And so many of you all, of course, know Chidamak from the chat, especially those of you who are in the chat. And you may also know her from, it's been a part of our study groups recently. And, but also lesser known, I think. It wasn't really known to me until she and I started corresponding a little bit more, that she's a writer, right? And she's written multiple pieces for Black Agenda Report, for Hood Communist, and on and on. And so, a while back, she and I started, kind of going back and forth about some things that we might eventually get around to talking about. And one of the things that she wrote a piece on, which is going to be part of our conversation today, and it obviously relates directly to solidarity between Black folks in Palestine, but it also really relates to a lot of these like social media influencer campaigns and talking points and, Democratic Party, you know, programs usually that are kind of filtered through a various set of media. Um, that really seek to disrupt solidarity specifically between Black people within this country and struggles against US imperialism, right? Or people that are oppressed by US imperialism. And so one of the pieces is Black people, Palestine, and the maintenance of empire. And it predominantly is reflecting kind of on some of the stuff we saw within the Kamala Harris campaign and so on. But this is still very much ongoing. Jasmine Crockett comes up in her writing and discussions around that. And then she has other pieces. She has pieces on housing. She has pieces on, technology and AI, and has been published, as I said, in Black Agenda Report, Counterpunch as well, Grassroots Thinking. Shout out to them as well. Hood Communists and other publications. And so there's a link tree and a way to support her work that is in within the link tree. There's this, you can support her work and you can check out her writings, as well as a couple that are on her Medium page, which are also really excellent. And we're going to talk about some of these today. Um, One thing is we were having a little bit of tech difficulty before we started. So if it's a little bit choppy in the beginning, just give it a minute and it should clear up. Because I'm sure that, you'll really want to hear what our guest has to say today. So without further ado, Terri, it's good to be with you. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, good to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. This is it's always fun when I meet somebody through the running the show, and it's somebody that you know has great analysis, has good things to say, but is not really one of the regulars on the podcast circuit as a guest and stuff like that. Although I know that you're an avid watcher of us, but also Black Liberation Media and other people within, our space. And so it's great that we get to have a conversation today about your work.
Nice. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Very nervous as I disclosed like before we went live on air, so I don't really usually do stuff like this. But yeah, just I guess introducing like just a little bit about me so people know me as Chidamak in the chats on YouTube. And I feel like just to explain that name, because I think Red Nation podcast just did a show maybe earlier this week on pretendings, right? And so just to clarify that, I was born and raised on stolen Chittamauga land, and which encompasses all of Southeast Louisiana, inclusive of the city of New Orleans. So that was my way on the internet of a nod to where I'm from without actually using the settler name. So that's why I'm Chidamak in the chat.
Good to know, and thank you for clarifying my pronunciation. I won't get it wrong again. I've been mispronouncing it for years now. So,
oh no, I'm not sure that's how it's pronounced. I'm just saying it the way that. Yeah, I mean, we're using a colonized tongue to be able to say something in an indigenous language, indigenous land. So,
yeah, absolutely.
but yeah.
All right, so let's just get into this up front. So, as I mentioned, one of the pieces from the beginning, you get into Black folks and the Zionist propaganda around Palestine. This is a really relevant topic. It's ongoing. We've got the Henry Louis Gates Jr. series that Dr. Ball has been talking about. Of like the histories of Jews and Black people, and trying to, really normalize or renormalize a kind of Zionist, set of histories and talking points around the relationships between Jewish folks in the United States and Black people's experiences. And the messaging around the Kamala Harris campaign, which obviously, is key to kind of what you were talking about in the piece. And then recently, we've seen a lot of these discussions. There's been more influencer stuff, I think even this week, related to Jasmine Crockett, which follow a very similar framing. And particularly, as I mentioned up front, like a lot of this kind of takes the form of these social media influencers. And so it has this veneer of being, a grassroots thing where people are just sort of like, oh, I'm just somebody who talks on the internet and I'm going to talk about this today, So what are some of the key things that you think are going on here that you want to highlight in your work?
So really started that piece that Black people, Palestine, the maintenance of empire. That was something I'd just been paying attention to. Initially, like I had a working title of the linchpin. And so what happens, a linchpin is something that basically it's in place. If you pull it, like the whole system, whatever it is, falls apart. And I was noticing two things: that you can't say free Palestine. You cannot advocate for the Palestinians, or you will get attacked from all sides. And then also this targeting of propaganda toward Black people. And initially, because I guess started on that piece before October 7th, and then when things went down, I kind of just held back on it. But then I was like, again, noticing the ramping up as you see students are being brutalized, people losing jobs, and people not really understanding the significance of Palestine, like not first and foremost of undergoing a genocide, but then just the apparatuses that support it, the people who are supporting it, or the people who are just naive to it. Because I think it woke a lot of people up in terms of understanding a bit more about the US empire and how it operates. And so again, like looking at that targeting of Black people, and where you see it, and it's been ramped up lately, again, with the kind of like, oh, this Black Jewish relationship, which is very disingenuous because it conveniently ignores all of the anti-Zionist Jewish people. Because I remember at some point after October 7th, it was, I guess, in New York, and there was, it looked like at least a couple hundred people. They were Jewish, and they got arrested for like advocating for free Palestine, for advocating against Zionist entity, because they're saying not in our name. And so that is conveniently ignored, in particular when we have this conversation about Blacks and Jews. And it's like, okay, well, which Jewish people doing what? Because if we're talking about those supporting the Zionists, because for me, when I see Zionism, it's a branch of white supremacy. And then thinking about the why, and I think even now, when I'm thinking about like how the rhetoric is happening about, well, it's the Jews, which you really see ramping up like it's, I guess, legitimate anti-Semitism. And it's, again, ignoring as a materialist, like understanding material analysis of why this is happening, like a lot of people miss it. So then people who are anti-Semitic just latch on to, well, it's the Jews. And that's why we don't want to like support, the US, like this is not a good thing. And then there's the people who are just naive, not realizing what's happening. And then there's just just not understanding the historical relationship. So for me, like digging in and going into looking back through the Black Power movement in particular, where you saw SNCC, where you saw figures like Kwame Ture, like Malcolm X, like their take on Palestine. And so for people to understand, like this has been a really long issue. There's everything that just turned on October 7th, because that would just be another, what do I call it? Just another glaring ignorance of history, to just think that everything came out of nowhere on October 7th, because then that leaves, okay, what about October 7th, 6th, and on and backwards in time? And then also, what about the relationship between Black people and Palestinians that has been historical? Because one of the things is that, what's the name of the book? Black Power in Palestine. That kind of goes into, in there, Palestine is part of public discourse from the Black movement. Like, and people not really understanding that history, that is, and just really thinking about U.S. foreign policy. And I know I might be going all over the place, so feel free to like reel me in, because I tend to Southerners talk in a very circuitous way to get to a point. I know, like, having lived in the North for so long, it's like people go from A to B and they're like, sorry, wrap it up. So I think I lost my train of thought.
Well, I can ask a follow-up. Oh, go ahead.
Yes. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I mean, like some of the other things that you're kind of looking at, right? One is the sort of geopolitical importance of the Levant region, and you talk about Yemen, and is it the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and, where Palestine is located. But you're also then talking about, the influence of AIPAC on Congressional Black Caucus, the efforts to go after Black student organizers, and so on. And so, yeah, I don't know if any of those points help you think about the other aspects of what you were talking about there.
Right. And so I think a lot of people, and part of my thing I do is I'm writing around in response to people around me, in response to conversations I'm hearing in the grocery store, in response to like talking to neighbors and just like seeing the things that are on their mind, and just the misinformation that they have, even offer an opinion. And so like my writing is really in response to that. But then people aren't asking, like, well, why is there so much effort and energy going into the genocide, going into not stopping the genocide? Because I had a friend, like once things really started ramping up after October 7th, and there were campments and there were all these people who were like clearly advocating for Palestine, and they're like, oh, well, now it's going to stop. Like, this is going to stop the genocide. No, nothing's going to stop this genocide other than the resistance on the ground, because that land is too important to a global white supremacist project. And so that was the part that I really wanted to get people to understand, that it's, when, for me, like, Zionism is a branch and a faction of white supremacy and of European hegemony, because Europe has no resources. They're resource deprived, which is what was the fuel for European colonization in the first place. Europe has hardly any food, oil, or minerals. Most of what gets to Europe is via the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. So after the successful Iranian Revolution in 1979, they need to ensure for their Europe's survival that they keep a European hegemonic condition in that region. And Israel is it. Because if they lose Israel, if the Palestinian resistance is successful, they lose control over the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. They lose control over the Gulf states monarchs that the West has set up, which means the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. And I don't know I think I sent that map. I don't know if you can pull that up. I just kind of wanted to, like, structurally, like, kind of situate that for people, so people really understand that. Oh yeah,
I will pull it up. Just give me a minute. Yeah, go ahead.
Because I'll, like, just go off on a tangent. When things went down in the Sahel, and it was Niger, I believe, where they talked about, they have tomato canning factories, and they grow tomatoes. They have tomato canning factories, and they themselves can't eat a single tomato. And my thing, I'm like, why the hell are you growing tomatoes native to the Americas? And then I started even becoming aware of all the plants that are native to the Americas that are grown on the African continent to feed Europe. And so this was and I can't even credit, like, where I took this as a screenshot from a video I was watching on YouTube, but just even looking at the supply routes coming from China, going through the Strait of Malacca, which is a choke point where it's between Singapore and Malaysia, if my geography is right. Like, they're firmly in the Western camp. Like, so that's not like a hot spot or an issue. Ships go around, they're coming through, stopping off in Sri Lanka, because otherwise that's like a long way to go across water with no, like, landing. And then you see everything hits through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, going up through the Mediterranean, going up through the Suez Canal, out through the Mediterranean, and through the Strait of Gibraltar, which I probably just pronounced that wrong, but then going and getting supplies to Europe. So that's oil, that's minerals, that's products, food that's not coming from the African continent, although much of Europe's food is being grown on the African continent to feed it, because, like, they don't have food. And so even when you think of just the oil alone, what the United States right now is trying to do to Cuba, to starve it of its oil, to then make the society collapse, is what will happen to Europe. And so looking at Europe not having oil, Europe not getting any of, like, it will literally make it collapse, which is why they're so on board with maintaining and keeping Israel, because it is their last stance. Since they don't have Iran, it is their last stance in that region to keep everybody in check and on board with the global pan-European project. Because even the Strait of Hormuz is closed. That oil coming from those Gulf states usually comes out and down through the Strait of Hormuz, and then goes back in through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, up the Red Sea, and again following that same route. And so they're fighting for European survival, because if Europe falls, then the United States, that's United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the other settler projects, they don't have a strong flank. And that means the global South has the potential to grow, to get what they need. Europe, all these people that, they complain about migration, the migration crisis, but then it's being instigated by the violence that they're creating in the global South to steal people's land. Like, it requires extreme violence to steal someone's land, which is what we're watching in Palestine, right? And so thinking about that going on in other places, all to maintain Europe. And I think part of all what happens is, like, Israel, they seem to, like, believe their own rhetoric about, like, oh, we're the chosen people in somebody else's land. And if they they're going a bit rogue, but they can do that because they understand their importance to the Pan-European project, right? Because there has to be something in that region so they can keep control over the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, because the Suez Canal, as we see, the Egyptian government is firmly on board with the imperial project. And so where they have their leadership or their comprador leadership in place is not a problem. But where people are resisting, that's the problem. And so I really wrote that, like, wanting people to really understand the structural relationship, the geolocation of that land, that the Palestinians are paying a very heavy price. But yeah, I don't know if I answered that question.
No, you did. Thank you. I mean, and I guess for me, this is always gets into kind of weird waters because I don't, I've had some recent conversations and I'm kind of reminded that I'm just not a believer in reformism, right? And so I'm not a big, this debates about the Democratic Party for me, they only hold so much weight for me because I genuinely think if we can't figure out something else to do besides the Democratic Party, then we're screwed. Ultimately, right? Like, the Democratic Party is not a savior. It committed the genocide, and it started, the genocide in Gaza, it started and was most of it happened, under
Under the
their leadership. And there was no significant opposition within the party to it. And so that's one thing. But I do understand people who are taking efforts, right, who are genuinely, horrified by what's gone on, right, and say, okay, like, we want to make sure that we get these politicians that, are funded by APAC and, are supporting these Zionist talking points out, right? And even though that wouldn't be my political ministry, to spend my time there, I get it, right? Because I think it's like people are they're trying to take action in the ways that they know how and so on. But this is really heavily fought by this campaign too of, and somebody mentioned it in the chat of, like, in an organizing space, and this happens in a lot of different organizing spaces. Like, they were talking about it in anti-ICE, um, you know, in Maine, in an organizing space against ICE, a Black organizer said people not voting for Kamala was because of anti-Blackness. I sat with what she said, the way anti-Blackness was weaponized, right? And she said did not sit right with me, right? And this is the thing. I mean, like, we now see this argument continuing in other ways, right? I mean, it's one thing, that particular talking point, I feel like, has a certain amount of leverage for people because we see how bad Trump is now. So then people are like, well, this would have been better, right? So this becomes the thing is they give an ahistorical, what if, right? Like, if you all had voted for Kamala Harris, then we wouldn't be going to a war with, we can't know, right, what we would be experiencing fully, right? We know that it would be bad, but maybe it wouldn't be the same bad, right? Like, I get it. And
argue that it would be the media coverage is what would be different, because Kamala said lethal on more than one occasion. She talked about Iran being an enemy. Like, the media coverage would be different. And I mean, if entering a 3 years, the third year of a genocide live stream, what, 2 years, almost 2 years of which took place under the Democratic Party. If people can't see the continuity of the system, I don't know. And I'm talking about people who are paying attention, because the other thing is, like, I'm around people who, like, they're just busy trying to not become unhoused, trying to pay the rent. And I'm not even talking about those people, but the people who think they are paying attention, the people who are elected officials, like supposedly working on behalf of the people who put them into office to do what? Because I mean, we see just how many people are just on board with not challenging, yo, we shouldn't be conducting a genocide. But if people aren't understanding the reason why it's happening, then they can't effectively form a way to resist it, or even to, I don't even know what to, can't effectively articulate like ways that it impacts us here. Because if the US is just all in on this genocide with money, no questions asked, with support, no questions asked, the politicians all on board, elected officials all on board, like, yeah, I mean, Kamala, like the media coverage, it would be different. Because like I've been, for myself, like talking about Kamala Harris for years, long before she ran for the presidency, because I was out on the West Coast and I was in San Francisco when she was the district attorney. I was in California when she was the attorney general with, I think, like 30% of the vote is what she got, if I'm remembering correctly, with very low voter turnout. So like even in her home state, like she didn't get support. And yeah, like it's, for her specifically, it was like a huge like amount of gaslighting. But then most Black people are located in the southeastern United States, very few in California in general, but then where we are on the West Coast, it's in pockets. And so people, I think, like east of the Mississippi, don't really understand the dynamics of the West Coast that produced Kamala Harris. And so like, I'm like, yo, she's not the one to be like losing your shit over, like, oh, a Black one. Like she don't give a fuck about Black people, unless maybe you have a certain amount of dollars in your bank account. That's my take on her.
Yeah, appreciated. So I guess let's talk about the student organizing aspect of it. So one of the things that we know is that the, Canary Mission, the Israel Lobby, all of these things, that one of the groups of people that they target most directly are Black organizers, Black student organizers, right? Like I was making I was talking in jest with Gabriel Bryant, before our podcast on Mumia last week, because, Gabe's on Canary Mission, and obviously it's not anyone's aspiration to be on Canary Mission. It makes it difficult for you to navigate your professional life and everything else, of course. But I was like, Gabe, how are you on it and I'm not? Like I've been I've been doing this, for years publicly, right? In ways that I know, I mean, we have plenty of Zionists who hate watch this show and take clips out and all that stuff, right? But, my theory is that Gabe is a Black man who's in an organizing space around Black people. And so that is like, it makes him an immediate target, even if he's not on, he's an organizer, so he's not on these media platforms, as frequently as I am. And so what is your thinking around, beyond what they tell us, which maybe that's where it comes from too, but about why Zionists particularly target Black organizers, Black student movements, as some of the people that they go after most harshly when they are anti-Zionist?
Well, it's to prevent that large and visible, because like Black people are the most visible in terms of we're used in the propaganda. So I know Dr. CBS in Black Scare, Red Scare, she has this thing like the structural location of Blackness. And it's really getting into like the economically structurally located within a specific place in capitalism in the core. But I also have been looking for language even though that she's talking about the economy, like there's a structural location of Black people within the propaganda of the United States. And in particular, for me, I've seen it when I've gone overseas. And it produces, like, as long as you keep, there's somebody at the bottom. So there's someone to always like aspire to, I just have to not be that. But because we're so visible, made visible in entertainment as like a huge distraction, we're visible to have specifically an anti-imperialist politic and resistance coming from within the core of the United States. That's a direct threat, because in particular, the way I've seen outside the US, as people look, there are people who also look to see, well, how are Black people resisting this, right? And I had people from outside the US, like even like tell me that in addition to like just other things I've like noticed when traveling overseas. But that would snowball, because if we can resist in the forms that we could resist here, that's why like the Panthers were such a threat, because a lot of people don't realize that the Panthers were Marxist, that the Black Panther Party, that they were communists, right? Like we'll talk about just from an analysis of, well, it was racist, they were militant, but never a descriptor of what militant meant. Like I didn't know myself until I actually started reading things that the Panthers wrote themselves. And I was like, oh, this is why they were a threat. Because if you think about the US's imperialist wars, what they're doing is killing communists. What they're doing is killing socialists. Because the first thing that socialists do, other than instituting like literacy programs, is land reform. And land reform is a threat to capitalism, because what happens when people take their land back and decide, okay, we can grow food for our people, we can house our people, we can build hospitals. Like that's a threat if, for capitalism, everything that we have is a product of imperialist violence. And I always like to use things like coffee, bananas, chocolate, because usually like somebody has a cup of coffee in their hand while I'm talking to them. It cannot be grown in the United States. There is nowhere random rest stop, truck stop in the middle of like a rural area, grocery store, where you cannot get coffee, chocolate, or bananas. These are exclusively tropical zone plants. And so we're talking about millions of acres of land. So then we have these products based on violence, because what would people do with their land if they had a choice? Grow something so they can survive? Because poverty is a condition that's on purpose. So they're either gonna like feed themselves or grow something for you that you don't really need. And the only reason we like need the pick me up of coffee is because capitalism has us so busy working that, like there has to be that energy jolt from somewhere. And so like the coffee culture was created. But, and so if you have people within the United States to begin thinking like that, and then first and foremost, recognizing that this is stolen land, because while I say like Black people are the highly visible, like oppressed group or otherized group in US society and culture, then we still have like a Native population. And when you look at statistics that are all these negative statistics for Black people, like having the high maternal mortality rates and whatnot, the disproportionate people who are unhoused in the US, numbers are just as high, and if not in some cases even higher, which is even more dire because they're like 3% of a population. And so the contradictions of the US, when people, even immigrants who come here, or even people outside the US who look to the US as a beacon of democracy and all this, and it's like, boo, we on stolen land. There were millions of people here. What we're watching in Gaza is what was done here with whatever methods they had to kill people at the time. And so to have that kind of visible resistance from within the core is a direct threat. So that's my opinion, why there's an even more insidious type of target for propaganda towards the Black community to either keep us either like tied to the imperialist project or to keep us, even when we deal with like compradors, like sometimes, not always, but especially when there's a class element to immigration. And there's a deliberate, what I notice, because it's also something else I've been trying to figure out how to articulately write about it, but where we as people are dealing with the compradors of empire internally. And so part of that, the propagandistic function of that is to make Black people believe, oh, we'll see, these people are racist. We'll see, those people are racist. And it's like, first of all, you're dealing with the people who sometimes betrayed their country to be on board with the imperialist project. Other times it's just people just fleeing the fucking violence and they had the resources to get the fuck out and they did. But then the way US media works that I've seen overseas, denigrating Blackness in ways that they can't really get away with doing here, it puts it in somebody's mind. Okay, well, let me go to the United States. This is great. Okay, well, Black people are the ones committing the crimes. Just stay away from them. I'll be okay. But, and then it depends on immigrants, like what experience they have when they get here. Oops, I'm sorry. Like something just, okay, sorry. It depends on the experience. Okay, it depends on the experience they have once they get here and their experience with white supremacy once they get here. But again, all that targeting towards the Black community because it is a threat because we've been made to be so visible. To have that large anti-imperialist confrontation within the core, because that's what the Black Panther Party represented, which is why they were systematically taken out. And so they've put in place mechanisms to kind of try to ensure that that kind of movement won't happen again, which is where the literacy crisis comes from. But that's a whole nother thing. But yeah, like it's a direct threat to capitalism if we have that anti-imperialist confrontation here.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. I'm also reminded, and I can't think of the exact quote, but Eugene Puryear has something that he says about Black people being like always being the ignition of revolt within this country or something like that, right? Like I'm just pointing to like whenever you have a mass movement or protests, like it 9 times out of 10, I mean, maybe with the anti-ICE thing, we could talk about it a little bit, but most of the time, right, it's Black people, resisting in mass, whether it's a lot of times it's cop killings and things like that, right? But killings by cop, I should clarify. But yeah, and so we'll get into some of that in a minute as well. But I wanted to go to another one of your pieces for a second because you wrote a piece in Counterpunch recently where you talked about the imposition of technology and the myth of these revolutionary leaps, right? We're often told these, for you and I, we've lived through this with when the internet came out and like the way that this was branded as revolutionary, and certainly it's a technology that we all got addicted to and use, like whatever. But it certainly didn't lead to some kind of revolution in the way that it was talked about or promised in the way when it came out. In fact, we could argue the counter-revolutionary, nature of it on the whole. But you're writing about it, thinking about in particular also AI right now and the kind of branding, going on around that. And shout out to Dwayne Monroe. I see him, in the chat. It's we've had a lot of good conversations along this. So do you want to share a little bit about what your main concerns are here? Maybe a little bit about how you articulated this within the piece and what you want people to be critical about in regards to the idea of, these new technologies.
Really was just thinking about how technology is imposed upon us. We don't vote for it. things just, we want everybody, like we have ways to improve our lives. So like as a generation, as a people, we can look who we are at our parents or our grandparents, great grandparents generation, and like, oh, we have an easier life, or we do have a better life, but due to technology, and we don't really think about the productive capacity, like who drives technology. And then again, the imperialists, like there's violence behind all the technological advances, because even if we think of like AI, like the data centers are prominent in the news right now, like because we're competing for fresh water, because these data centers need fresh water that people need to drink, and that is the primary human need. Like you will die in 3 days without water. You can live for 3 weeks without food. So that's the primary human need, is we're going to be competing with that for what? Because it might be convenient to like, hey, I have a computer. I used to type papers on a typewriter. I used to handwrite papers. Okay, yeah, this is really great, but not if I understand, oh, somebody got killed and is being slaughtered somewhere else so that I can have this. Well, this isn't really a good use of technology. This isn't even like something, and I think the fact that's kind of like a hidden component, or just something that we don't, in particular in the United States, really think about when we have like the newest and latest technology and everything that's updated. It gets I don't know, we think about it, because even like when you think like the internet, the first cable was laid in the 1850s, the first successful cable in 1857. Like that's like the deep long-term structural planning. That entire network was completed by the time, I don't know if it was right after or right before World War II, at least for Richard E. Harrison to produce that map that showed the entire network. And when you see that, like, okay, that's the violence of imperialism, because European colonization, the United States, Europe, like collaborators, have mapped out the seafloor to determine to put these cables, but then it requires mining of the Earth's resources from land where people live to even get them in the first place, to then lay them down in the water, and then like who knows what it's doing there. But then to constantly grow and to expand means to constantly keeping to extract Earth resources, which means to constantly create violence so that people can live on land. But it's also not just the direct violence, it's the indirect violence, the poverty that's created on purpose because people have been displaced from land. So they can no longer live in instances where their community has been for hundreds of years or thousands of years, because the Western corporations and these rich white men, clear guys and neckties, have decided they want society to look a certain way. So they can extract more wealth and impoverish us, but then get the faction of us who are not at the bottom of the food chain to be like, oh, this is like really cool, and not have to think critically or think at all about how and why we have these products.
Yeah, as you're talking about that, like I'm just thinking about all of the, you know, the Zionist entity yesterday put out an evacuation order for South Beirut, Dahia, the predominantly Shia area of Beirut, and it's like 700,000 people who live there, and they're told to evacuate, and like where the fuck are they supposed to go? Um, and you talk about that too. Like you had a piece about housing as well, and you connected, the destruction of homes within Gaza with the struggle for housing, in the United States. And so, yeah, I mean, maybe you could say a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that, like, I remember for when the images, I can't remember like what the date was, but it was after like the 12 universities in Gaza had been destroyed. Like, I don't know, like how many hospitals and all. And so someone had posted an image of what Gaza looked like before October 7th and what it looked like at that point. And the first thing that jumped into my mind, I was like, oh, it's a clearing. Like, this is what it looks like. So Marx talks about the Duchess of Sutherland, but there's like the Highland clearings. It's like we don't think about the way land was privatized. Like, people just lived on land. They didn't pay somebody to live on land. We lived on land. We built buildings on land. We forged communities on, but people lived on land. And so that what Marx talks about the Duchess of Sutherland, where it's like over what a 6-year period displacing 15,000 people because she wanted the land to have a sheep farm. And so, fuck all where these people are going to go. Like, they had been living there for, like, that was all they knew. But again, like, to clear the land. And it was so, the British soldiers, like, do you think of the armed agents of the state right now? They, whatever wealthy people say that they want, they're like, they go out and they do it. But I don't even, and then Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz in Indigenous Peoples History of the United States talks about the Cherokee people, where, when the British got here and like in a year's period had displaced like thousands of people with the same method of just burning their stuff to the ground. And then they built their imperialist like cities and whatnot on top of that. And just even in thinking about the landscape of the United States, because I remember when I was a kid, something, I can't even remember what it was, but I had a relative who said, well, the Indians didn't know where they were, which is like some crazy shit. But the reason why we don't see in North America the landscape is because of these methods of clearing, of where you level their stuff to the ground, like what we're watching in Gaza, and build your shit on top, which is the plans that they've expressed. They have like, they've made like these AI videos of it, like Trump and all that. Well, like, this is going to be the casino and all this stuff, this modern city. But first, it's being leveled to the ground and people are being slaughtered to make that happen. And we don't connect often that method of clearing happening here in North America. It happened, Europe did it, they did it there first. And so I always think, for me, I'm like, it's really problematic that white people don't know their own history in Europe, because you would understand and maybe not fall for the okie doke now. Right. And so, yeah. And so like when I saw that, and I was just like, it's a land clearing, and not really, like, none of us, or at least like here in the US, I'm sure, because these are like the same methods of clearing that still happen via imperialist violence. But connecting that to, well, they just don't give a fuck. They want the land for what they want it for. And okay, you're on it. Well, so go somewhere else. And that's the poverty that's created on purpose. And that was really me trying to find like a through way to connect this historical process of land clearing to what happens now. Because even when the Super Bowl was in New Orleans last year, they just, what was it, like $11 million to clear out. And they use the same language. They call it clearings. They say clear out or clearings. Like, they still use the same language, which is inhumane to do this.
Yeah, no, they do.
Yeah, and it's all, yeah.
I also want to give a shout out real quick to Lara Kilani, the Good Shepherd Collective. Folks, please follow them. And also, they have a great Substack, which I've been meaning to have them on to talk about, but they launched it within the last few months, and a lot of really good analyses and articles from Palestine there. And also, Dwayne Monroe, appreciated your map in the supply chain imperialism, comment as well. All right, so one of the other pieces that you talk about, it's kind of a thread, I think, through a lot of your writing, is thinking about the production of violence. Um, and of course, as you've already kind of talked about, right, you tie this to the material need for resources and land under a capitalist imperialist system. But always bring in the violence, whether it's settler, colonial, imperial, or for technology and the mass production of commodities, whether those commodities are things that we actually need or in many cases are not. So, what do you see as the relationship there? And how do you think about the historical violence of, say, something like lynch mobs or settler colonial genocide in relation to the imperialism of today?
I think when I think of the violence and thinking about the, I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yep.
You can, okay, sorry. Um, Thinking about I think we often don't think about the violence, and I always like it as a level of psychopathy, because I think if we don't understand in resistance what we're dealing with, because often like our humanity gets in the way of our imagination, right? Because it just seems so inhumane that, well, we can't imagine that that's the mechanism that allows wealthy people to be wealthy, and the mechanism that creates poverty, that creates destitution. And so, in thinking about, I always think about it like the psychopathy of it, not to excuse them of their behavior, but more so to get us to understand what we're dealing with. So, like back in the 90s, like I had read Ida B. Wells, because I used to have a professor, and she was always, oh, we can't talk about Ida B. Wells because then you have to talk about lynching. And given me, a Gen Xer, like I thought I knew what lynching was, because everybody, all of us, we'd at least seen or had knowledge of like lynching postcards. Um, and so she mentioned it enough. So I said, well, let me actually read what she wrote. So I read Southern Horrors and A Red Record. And that for me had me looking at, US society and this in a side eye ever since. And so understanding that, like, she brought the material reality of the lynch mobs, where it was one thing connected to the money, because like there was economic competition with white people, like that's where there were more lynchings. And also thinking about that violence, whereas I feel like recently somebody said, like, when there's someone's found hanging from a tree, like that's a lynching, because those are the images we saw from the postcards. But that's not what lynching is. Often not understanding that it's a mob, that they could get as large as 3 and 5 and 10,000 people, where someone was tortured, and hopefully long before they hung that corpse from a tree, had succumbed to their injuries, because like these were corpses that were being hung as a result of torture, as a result of violence. And even when we look today, like we see that like there has to be the ruling class, as we see with the Epstein files, clearly psychotic. But they also have to produce a level of psychopathy in the population. You have to have, or they have to have, people who are willing to kill for the sake of killing. When they're aimed to say, do this, those people are the enemy, or like they're willing to do it. What struck me is Jared Ball. I mix what I like. He sometimes tells these stories of when he was on the Navy ship, and I might be getting a story, so forgive me if I am. But he talked about like the special forces guys, like they would go out and whatever it is they were doing, and one day came back to the ship and they were just in a really bad mood, and just like he didn't know like what happened. can't go out and kill somebody that day. So you have to breed a level of the population who enjoys killing for the sake of killing, because then you can put them in a military uniform, you can put them in special ops, and you can do land, you can conduct land clearings. You can move people, humans around where the ruling class, where you want them to be or not be, and not have to worry about like, oh, is the mission going to go awry? Because if somebody has their humanity and you're about to tell them to kill somebody who they don't even know, because like US right now is fucking overseas, 8,000 miles away from US borders, talking about protecting America. But you have to have a certain population. So if they're not wanting to kill, then it won't work. Because if they see, oh my gosh, this is like a mom and her kid, like, then it's not going to work to the mission to clear the land, to defend capital. Because even there's a video I saw recently where it was US soldiers. It looked like a desert environment. It was like 3 or 4 of them in their full like military tactical gear uniforms. And the one, he had a puppy. Like it looked like maybe like a 5-month-old puppy, how you can grab them by the scruff of the neck, because the mother still does that and it doesn't hurt them. And he's got the puppy at the camera and he's like, oh, look how cute, this little puppy. And it's like, oh, like you didn't know where the vid. Like, oh, he found a puppy in the middle of the desert. And when I tell you, like, what's the position? Not linebacker, quarterback, like a quarterback. He took and flung just for the fuck of it. You have to have people, they're breeding a certain portion of the population that does that. And even when you look at here, which again, for me, no Black elected official will even talk about things that impact Black people here in the core, like the maternal mortality rates, or like the fact of, okay, we'll talk about, there'll be discourse on Black men and boys are getting disproportionately locked up in prison. We see the extrajudicial killings on the street by police, unarmed. But we're not even talking about the fact that they're being tortured, sodomized, and sexually assaulted in prisons and juvenile detention centers. And again, it can't, like one of the pieces I wrote about, like Robert Brooks, right? Like this is, you see the video, these men are like standing around like it's not happening. He has to be screaming at some point. At some point, his clothing is removed. Why? Like he had already been subdued. He can't do anything. He's like literally outnumbered by a mob of armed agents of the state. And how routinely that goes on. And every once in a while, we'll get video or a story will make the news. But then it's happening behind closed doors. There's all the instances where it's happening, where it's not making the news. Like in Jena, Louisiana, where Mahmoud Khalil was locked up. It's in the middle of nowhere. So like it was literally, all of us took it was like 4 hours from whatever direction we came from. Immigration detention center. It was a juvenile detention center that got shut down because it was so inhumane, because there were things happening to children. Because when we're talking about Black boys, we're talking about children. But when I looked at where Jena, because that was my first time going there, and if you haven't been to really rural parts of the United States, there's nobody immigrating to Jena. There's no, so the same employees who worked at the facility when it was a juvenile detention center that had to be shut down, in my mind, granted, I don't have any proof, the same people who are working there as an immigration detention center. But again, that violence that, you know, we don't really, elected officials don't talk about. Black elected officials don't talk about because it's impacting our community. But then they're also tying that to the actions of US imperialism and the breeding of that psychopathy amongst a portion of the population because they have to be willing to kill for capitalism, not understanding that's what they're doing, but just kill for the sake of killing. And when you have a portion of the population that does that, you send them overseas to people who you've otherized, and like it just doesn't matter. Because I mean, like even with what's happening with Iran, videos have been like surfacing in what, you know, things that are happening in Iraq. And like some were videos like I hadn't seen. But then when we have somebody like Madeleine Albright, 1 million dead Iraqis was worth it. And Leslie Stahl, the so-called journalist, no pushback. Like, oh, okay. Just normalized. And so that 1 million dead people, because they were very adept at hiding the atrocities of that illegal invasion, we're seeing what it was with video released now. We're seeing what it was by watching what's happening in Gaza. And also like in thinking of why we have to think of this as one system, because while they're always like so many steps ahead of us, because they have the luxury of like the deep long-term structural planning that crosses time, that crosses geography. Because I would contend that what's happening in Iran right now, the invasion of Iraq, was part of the setup, because there were no weapons of mass destruction. The United States was there illegally. They built military bases, I believe it's 12, 8 of which, if I have my numbers right, border Iran. Iran's longest border is shared with Iraq. It completed the military encirclement of Iran. That is what the invasion of Iraq did. The oil was a fringe benefit, because Iran, every country surrounding Iran has US military bases, which is what's making the US military vulnerable now. And then you have people like, I just saw a clip with like Jon Stewart, where he's just like making some joke to a nascent audience of okay, Israel and the United States attack Iran, and oh, Iran attacks everybody. No, Iran is attacking US military bases that are encircled it. And it just gets me really frustrated and really angry, and which is why it's also highlights why it's so important to pay attention to US foreign policy, and why it's so important that we have that internationalist perspective, because the violence will continue here in our communities as long as the violence is able to continue abroad.
Thank you. Thank you. It was great. I want to shout out too, we did just hit 15,000 subscribers. This is the first video we've had since we hit that. So just shout out to all the people who have subscribed to the channel. Really appreciate each and every one of you for that. And so I want to go to another one of your pieces that I thought was really a well, I mean, all your stuff is really well written. It's all very, like all your pieces are accessible. They're all short. And I don't mean that in like a, you know, I mean that as a positive. Like it's it kind of, God, this is a strange reference to bring up, but if anybody's ever seen the movie River Runs Through It, like in the beginning of it, the kids have a father who's a minister, but he's also their teacher, and they have to write essays for him. And like every time that they write it and bring it to him, they have to do this before they can go out to fish or play. And it's in like Great Depression era, like, well, in the time of Prohibition. And every time he does it, he looks at it, he says, good, now half as long. And then they have to go back and try to make it more concise, right? And then it says, good, now half as long. So he does it like 2 or 3 times, and he's like, okay, now go play, and now throw it away and go play, whatever. Um, but I bring it up because it's a technique that I feel like probably has been lost, and I've never been very good at it in my own writing, of trying to, make your point as directly as possible, right? You always use good examples. You always, you know, use things like you said with like the bananas, chocolate, and coffee, like stuff that is just easy for people to understand. Um, but you also make sure not to make a piece, a really long read that then, you might lose people who don't have the time or the attention span to read something that long. And look, that I read a lot of long stuff too. There's a lot of value in long reads as well, but there is, I
Yeah.
think, a real value in being able to really write concisely and, try to get your point across and try to make it accessible for people who, may not come into it with, all the knowledge, all the terminology, et cetera, et cetera. So anyways, the piece that I'm talking about here though is this piece that you wrote, that's about the portrayal of Jesus. And so you basically talk about it as the propaganda of the image, right, in relation to the proliferation of these images of Jesus, you know, the white guy with either the sandy brown or blonde hair, right? And the effects that a production of the image of a white or European Jesus has had over centuries. And you're particularly thinking about this in terms of Black folks, but not necessarily in the way that some people have been, kind of like, there is that critique, right? Of like, oh, you're bowing to a white European Jesus, right? But you're also trying to make a kind of historical critique and argument as well that I think is really interesting. So, yeah.
Yeah, and so like my motivation for writing that piece is I was driving somewhere and outside this church, um, maybe it was like right around Christmas time, and there was a life size, or I was at a distance, so it may have been a large life size image of Jesus, and it's white man, or it's somebody. If you look at him, you don't recognize the iconography. You're thinking Europe. And so that kind of like spurred me. And I'm like, I looked at it and I'm like, that's the problem. Like, that right there is what's causing confusion in Black people. And where I'm saying, like, specifically, like I'm in a Black area, like I'm like almost exclusively around Black people. And so I'm like, this is what's causing confusion about who belongs on that land. And so just started going through like that image, because I remember my grandmother had that image, and I think I have it on the piece, the Warner Solomon image. And everybody whose homes I went into, we all had that same, everybody had that same image of Jesus, like that same framed image. And it just got me thinking. I'm like, well, where the hell did that image come from? Like, everybody had literally the exact same image. And so just kind of going through and tracing that, and found Warner Solomon, Nordic immigrant, son of Nordic immigrants, but also like going back through time, finding the Dore Bible of illustrations, where it's just like, and I found it interesting that all of these events took place in the Levant. The people in the Bible, the people in the Torah, all these figures in Islam, they're all in the Levant. Jesus himself, to my knowledge, never stepped foot in Europe. But we have Europeans who are using religion to justify land theft, whether it be Christianity, whether it be Judaism. They're using religion that doesn't even come from Europe. And part of the success of that is the iconography that's used. Because, okay, we're told Jesus was Jewish. And, okay, but he was from the Levant. What did that have to do with Europe? And so this imagery that keeps, and so when it comes to, because I have to like sidetrack real quick, the commercials that I get on my YouTube feed when I'm not logged in. Like I watch things on a monitor where I'm not logged in, because every once in a while I might want to watch something a little different that I don't want it to mess with my feed and start feeding me things. But something about that algorithm, once it identifies that, okay, I'm a Black person, identifies, okay, maybe not a conservative, and the garbage propaganda it's been giving me, especially lately. And there was a video recently, two videos. One was these two Black people, a guy and a man and a woman. And the guy starts out with like, oh, well, people think all Jews are white. I'm like, no, people don't think that. Ethiopian Jews aren't white. But okay. And then he starts into, I guess the two of them, they were Black and Jewish. And it started into something about basically we have some kind of unity, and like, I don't know, it was like this Henry Louis Gates-esque, like that series that he just did, that awful series, that propagandistic series that he just did. And then when I think of that, like forming that connection, and then it was also like another video that it was clearly somebody speaking Arabic, like with the green headband. I don't know if that's specifically Hamas that has a green headband with the Arabic writing, but like whatever it is, they show a video, he's saying something, and there's this elder Black woman who's like church-going grandma is who she looks like to me. And somebody gives her the like a phone or something so she can watch this video and subtitled, and she just looks at it and she's like, oh, Hamas, he's bragging to his mother about killing people. I'm like, get the fuck out of here. Like, first of all, I know you don't understand Arabic. So you took somebody telling you, and I mean, it's just like part of like that propaganda. And so when I think about that image helping to contribute with that kind of messaging. And so with this thing of like, all Jews are white, like, no, but European Jews are the ones running shit in the Levant, in Israel. They come from Europe. Look at where Milikowski, where did he when stuff went down, where did he go to? Germany. You can't even write that. Germany, the place where the Holocaust like actually was perpetrated from. That's where he fled to. His ancestral homeland. I know Poland is right next door, but you know, borders are fake, drawn on a map by white men. So, but it's like, that's where he went to. He went home. But we're meant to believe that Europeans have a right to be in the Levant based on that image, reproduced by white men, reproduced by printing presses that are owned by men. And I think I like talked about like which presses in the piece, but then there's also like more recently, the Time magazine special edition, where they've done it for a couple of years. And it's all these, again, like the Dore Bible, it's stories in the Bible. I think it's like a little bit updated at the end. They have like Christians from other parts of the world, and they've got some like Black people in Africa in there and whatnot. And you've got some people in parts of Asia in there, I think. But the thing is like the reproduction of the images, they're still Europeans. I remember having a child's Bible, illustrated Bible in the 70s. And I actually did find it online. I just couldn't work it into the piece, like it was getting too long. But Jesus had blonde hair in that Bible. So the whole time I was a kid, I associated the events in the Bible with Europeans. And that imagery, and I think when we grow with it, it's causing confusion as to who belongs on that land. And so, yeah, and then it's like you have people, I think I talked about like Jasmine Crockett in that piece where she had an interview, Hollywood Unlocked, like, and was talking about the, dismissive of, well, the conflict on that land, like she can't resolve it or something like that. I don't remember the video. I have it actually linked in the piece. And, talking about, well, there's contestation over the land. It's like, well, that part is true because Europeans have been invading that land since the Romans. Under Roman occupation, then the Crusades, people coming out of Europe again to fight for a holy land. Like, yo, it's not your land. So, yeah, so I don't know. So that was my motivation for writing that piece, really like just delving into it. Even when you have like, I think I talked about like Bill Maher, because he had made a comment of like, well, Jews have been in that land for like 2,000 years, long before there was an Arab or Muslim. And it's like, oh, but Judaism is a religion. You're talking about nationality, ethnicity, race. Europeans, you were not the Jewish people who were there. Just like Ethiopian Jews were in Ethiopia, Eritrea. Because I remember reading at some point, like they didn't even understand that there were Jewish people in Europe until they encountered them. So we're talking about a belief system, a cultural practice, and conflating that with, okay, and it's also the fact of like the prominence or well, I guess I'm saying the prominence of Jewish people in the civil rights movement as being the white people. All white people who were active in the civil rights movement weren't necessarily Jewish, but like there's a faction you clearly visible, but using that as a way to again further confuse the issue. And those same Jewish people, when Black people like SNCC began developing an internationalist lens, those same Jewish people were like, no, don't do that. And when, SNCC was like, no, yes, we are. This is what we're seeing. Those same Jewish people pulled funding from SNCC because of that issue. Because why? They were protecting the global pan-European project. While every single person participating may not understand what's happening, but they understand what's happening.
Yeah, and I think, so it gives me an opportunity to tease our International Women's Day episode that's going to come out on Sunday, which is an interview that Nora Barros-Friedman and I did with Arlene Eisen, who also has been a part of the study groups and stuff. And, Arlene represents a different current too, in terms of she was an anti-Zionist Jew already in the 1960s, right? And so, she didn't leave the civil rights movement or the anti-war movement, because SNCC. No, she actually was the editor of the movement newspaper, which was a solidarity newspaper between SDS before it split and SNCC. And it was before that a Friends of SNCC newspaper, right? And so, there have always been, and I don't, it's interesting that this becomes a talking point specifically with Jews, because I think, and this is one of the problems with a very reductive version of identity politics, right? Because within every group of people, there are folks who are pro-empire and comprador, or looking to serve capitalism and imperialism, right? And there are people who have principled stances against those things, and I think when we get too bogged down in talking about things just in terms of these like very broad identities, like an entire religion that has its own religious and cultural ecosystem across millennia, that we would think that all Christians or all Jews or all Muslims, right, are going to side on one side or the other on some kind of political issue or struggle. And I think that that's just unfortunately, really, you know, I think anytime that we are encouraged to look at people in this kind of, even if it's not monolithic, because it's not always, they're not always presenting people as monoliths. Sometimes it's to say, well, we are not a monolith, but it's to say that somehow it's racist or it's anti-Semitic or it's something something, to take a strong political stand around, no, we're not going to support that nation state or that project or that settler colony or, that empire or this war, right? Like, these are political issues, and there's going to be people who are on the wrong side of them and people who are on the right side of them. Yeah, anyway. um all right, so the one more question that I want to ask is, um yeah, I mean, obviously Iran, right, is on both of our minds right now a lot. This is something that you've talked about throughout this conversation as well. And I would argue, I don't know if this is correct or not, but I would try to argue that Iran has been even more effectively demonized by the US media over the years, than Palestine has. And I think it's because it's a credit to the work of Palestinians, right? Of, you know,
Mhm.
being able to present their own narratives, their own struggles, their internationalism to connect in such a way that they fought back against so many of these psyops. And that's not to say that Iranians haven't tried to do that; they have. But um, I just think that unfortunately, in a lot of ways, the demonization feels to me even more total within our society around Iranian people. Um, and I was thinking about reading your pieces about the quote unquote diversity within the US military. Obviously, we could talk a lot about, the coercive mechanisms historically that have brought Black people into the US military, as well as some of the historical arguments that have been made for their inclusion and involvement in US wars. In many ways, as we think about it, that the US military might represent empire's first and most successful DEI project. It's been going on for, well over like 160 years or so at this point, right? Um, but what impact do you think that that has had over generations, and how does it connect with your thinking here around the role of Christianity, the image of Jesus, and the propaganda that is designed to convince Black people that their interests are connected up with those of capitalist elites in this country? Which is to say, there are people who support this war on Iran, right? And there are people who support the U.S. military, and one of the ways that that takes shape is we know people, we have people within our families that are in these things, right? They in our communities and so on. So, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, part of I think what, aside from being funneled into the military, but the one thing with Palestine in the after October 7th, for me noticing the number of Black people who became the face of the U.S. support for the genocide, whether it was Linda Thomas Greenfield, like being the, no, no, the ceasefire. And then they brought another one when she wasn't there one day. Another Black one was another Black man. Whether it be, what's his name, the head of AFRICOM, I can't think of his name, Michael Langley, again another one from Louisiana, being the head of AFRICOM, and then just there's been a placement of very prominent Black people. It kind of, when we see that, it gets us into thinking that we're on board. We should be on board with this project, because when we see Black people, like, we're starved for representation under white supremacist system. We're starved for, okay, the people who I know, the Black people around me, if they could just get in office, I know they care about me, care about the community. So then if they're up there, so then we get fooled into seeing them in like somebody like Michael Langley, somebody like, as we're disproportionately, in particular in the Southeast, kind of funneled into the military because like there's no options. In particular, given the disinvestment in public education, and so like the skill set to even be able to go somewhere, to like have some choices has been significantly diminished. And when we see that as an opportunity, because ultimately people just want to live and be able to take care of things. And so when the military is presented as that, because the one thing, when we buy into this project and then are sent overseas to kill, to sent overseas to function in whatever role is happening, to create chaos, to contribute to the slaughter, it kind of, without any kind of political awareness or awareness of empire, or awareness of what the system is, or like why we're over in one place fighting, it's having the impact of increasing our buy-in of like just regular people on the street. As Black people, okay, well, we belong. If we fight this time, because we don't know history, if we fight this time, they'll be all right. You know, even though there is history, World War II, fighting to, you know, to end the Nazi regime, and then coming home getting lynched, wearing their US service uniforms, Black men. And so we think this time, if we just do it, not understanding what we're doing, because we don't pay attention to US foreign policy, is just creating that buy-in, or at least less of questioning, or I would say less of questioning amongst a certain visual strata, like that petty bourgeois strata, who, because they're bought in, and they're the ones who we have direct facing like interactions with, or like in the community, they're the ones who, the compradors, to keep the rest of us in check. So when we have this proliferation of prominent Black people in prominent positions in the military, cahoots with these prominent politicians, elected officials who vote, support military budgets, don't know what's happening or know what's happening, they're just on board with it, whatever. It just has this impact of leaving a strata of the population just voiceless, but powerless, because ultimately we need food. And there's no other way to get it other than a military paycheck. Right? That's even with ICE, like what the signing bonuses that I saw somewhere, they're not even like getting, there were like conditions, like you got to do this for 5 years or whatever. But I mean, it's just like, okay, I need a paycheck. I can just do this. But then again, it works because you have to breed a psychopathy, a certain level of psychopathy amongst the population. So they'll be willing to just go out and brutalize or terrorize or even outright kill on behalf of the United States. So yeah, and with the conditions under this system, I don't know, that propaganda is just really, really like effective, and it's just work and struggling every day to get beyond it, to be able to break through that propaganda with like the people around us. And like for me, I'm like with people around me, and I'm just like, what are we doing? Because I had like a relative, I tried to like set them up to go like look at some things online or whatnot. They don't even know how to do it. And then the monitor has the ability to get to the internet, but then we couldn't hook it up to the internet. So this is somebody who thinks they're informed because they're watching CNN and MSNBC and like, oh, look at these prominent Black people telling us these things. And I'm just like, oh my God, like, oh, this is why it's so like I'm around like older people who like they don't even understand if there's a whole ecosphere of alternative information because they can't access it.
Yeah. Yeah. I just a quick follow up on that, and then I'll let you. We'll wind down. But I mean, I was thinking also about your thinking around, as you talked about a little bit in that, right? The indoctrination, the meaning like people who go in the military, like you said, they have to be trained to kill, they have to be indoctrinated to kill, right? They have to move past whatever moral or ethical boundaries that they might feel in terms of, you know, in terms of this kind of violence, right? There's also like, you know, you've read the Fort Bragg cartel, right? I
I
can't remember if
started
you have.
it. I haven't finished
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
but I know what I know what it's about.
Yeah, I mean, but like for people who haven't read it, I mean, just it gets heavily into special forces and the involvement and the amount of narcotics that special forces are on, as well as their involvement within the global drug trade. But um, but part of the reason that they're on these drugs is to manage their sort of minds, right? And to
Yeah.
also like hop them up and and all this like to and then they get hooked and they're given these things right as part of the military initially of like, oh, you're going to go out on raids, like we'll give you these drugs to prepare
Mm-hmm.
yourself for it, right? And then then they supplement it with other narcotics or they get addicted or they need to find other things, right? And on and on. um so I think about like the violence, and Jared Ball also referenced, shout out to Jared. um there was a funny joke made that if you our friend Steven said, one more Candyman from Jab and he's going to jump on the screen. Shout out to Jared Ball in the chat. But he did say here, the Special Forces video channels I watch from time to time admit their psychopathy all the time. They know it. They think of it as necessary to defend the country, defense of the country, right? To defense of the country. And so there's that, right? There's like, what does it mean for all of these Black people to be, to be coerced or not to become a part of this structure and to become indoctrinated and then also, you know, addicted and trained to kill, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and then as you talk about ICE, right, we could talk about, the diversification of police forces around the country, right? And part of what I was thinking about within your pieces is how part of your analysis always is connecting these international things with what's going on domestically as well, right? And so I was wondering for you, like, what do you think are the effects of that kind of connection to the Black community?
The effects, as in the impact that.
Yeah.
So in terms of I feel like the conversations like I'm always having like around me, like getting people to see that what's happening here is directly correlated to what's happening that we can't see. And so always connecting whenever something's happening in the community, thinking about the parallels, thinking about where else, where the origins are. So like when we see Black people being disproportionately unarmed killed by the police, like thinking about the mechanisms in play, because it's beyond like somebody's racist. Yeah, that's true. And then what do we think when, okay, we have the case of it's black officers who participate in white supremacy. It's black officers who will participate in the killing of black people, of unarmed black people. What are the mechanisms that are allowing that? I want people to really think about the mechanisms that are allowing that to take shape and take form and to be displayed. Because one thing for me that I said that, like, I don't write about black people in the black community directly, because there are lots of people doing that and they're doing an excellent job. And I can like, oh, go and read that or go and watch this. Right. And so for me, I'm always trying to think about the mechanisms and white supremacy and the violence behind it create the conditions that we're experiencing here as a primary. Because I'm like, if I can get people to understand that there's a mechanism, a system that is creating this experience beyond just where we tend to get stuck of, well, somebody's racist. Okay, and what's creating that? What are the social mechanisms? What's the propaganda? What use is it for this system to allow us to be killed? What's the benefit that it's serving? Just like asking, you know, what's the benefit of the genocide in Gaza? To whose benefit are they being slaughtered? Just like, to whose benefit is it to attack Iran? Whose benefit is it for the maternal mortality rates to be double the national average? Because it's something more than just, oh, well, somebody doesn't like black people. Right? And so I always try to get people to think about, and it's difficult because when you're getting brutalized or you're dealing with some racist BS in whatever moment, like it's difficult. But for those of us who are fortunate enough to have that ability in our community to be able to make those connections, it's our duty to try to, by whatever means that we can, to try to break this down, to be able to get our folks to understand a bit more about what's going on so that we can collectively make decisions that will ultimately lead to liberation. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
It's a great place for us to leave, whether you answered it or not. No, I'm just kidding. No, it was a great response. Yeah, I mean, I think just to clarify a little bit of what I was thinking about there, you know, and I don't have like a firm, you know, analysis or framework fully on this, but you know, somebody like Dylan Rodriguez has a term that he uses of multiracial white supremacy, and I think part of what the question is for me, right, is like, I mean, you talked about the way that the you know, the inclusion in these things sows confusion, you know, and all of that. I'm also interested in what does it do, like what are all of the effects of having black people perform the violence of white supremacy, right? You know, and the meaning, you know, whether that's policing. I mean, a lot of the killings that you know, cops shoot people, right? A lot of them are done by black police officers. Obviously, you know, there's a ton that are done by white, and you know, but there's a different kind of dynamic to a lot of times how those things get responded to or talked about within community and conversations also around, what side are people going to take in some of these scenarios. And I think that, we could talk about that from a propaganda standpoint, or just sowing confusion, which it does. But there's also, I think, just a kind of profound psychological impact that has, in addition, to people, which I guess is related to the confusion, point. It muddies the waters in a lot of ways, right? And it is ability of the system, as you were talking about, with Lloyd Austin and all of these figures, right, to give a different veneer on what things are really about, where people see an investment in it rather than seeing it as the kind of violent imposition that it really is. So, yeah, I appreciate all the work. Thank you for this conversation. Please,
Thank
folks,
you.
check out the link tree, read the pieces for yourself, uh, you know, follow all of your social media. I should have included that. Maybe it's in your link tree, but if not, you're on. Usually,
Probably
if you
not.
just search, Chidimak
Chidamak, yeah.
on like all the platforms, you'll find her, and keep writing, keep doing what you're doing as a political educator within your own community, and I think you're part of Black Alliance for Peace too, right?
Yes, I am part of Black
Yes,
Alliance
yeah.
for Peace.
Keep up
Yeah.
keep up your organizing and your work there as well. So anyways, thank you to you, Terry, and thank you to the chat. Much appreciated to Dwayne Monroe, my friend, and also ZZ Lion Dad. The John Stewart joke was racist. Congrats on 15K. Preach, sister, on these contradictions regarding religions, movements, and politics. Respect. Yeah, and again, shout out to Good Shepherd Collective from joining us from the West Bank. Jared Ball, Dr. Jared Ball in the chat. By the way, Stephen, this is not a bad idea. Jared, I'm down if you are. We could figure out a buddy comrade, YouTube show to do together once a month or something like that. So anyway, always down to collaborate. But this was great, and I look forward to your future. I'm sure now people will see you and hit you up. You should be on other shows as well more often. Maybe we could get you on Black Liberation Media. So, all right, thanks again. This was
All
wonderful.
right. Thank you. Peace
Peace.
and free Palestine.
Free Palestine.